You see cacao and cocoa in the baking aisle, and usually one is way more expensive than the other. But are they actually the same thing, or have we been buying the wrong ingredient this whole time? By the end of this video, you will know exactly which one to buy, when, and whether that price difference is real or just a label trick. The answer is not what most people expect. One plant, two names. Both words come from the same plant, one tree, Theobroma cacao. In Greek, that name means food of the gods, which sounds excessive until you learn that people have been treating it that way for over 1,700 years. Cacao and cocoa are not different plants, not different ingredients from different sources. They are the same bean at different stages of processing. The difference is heat. That is the whole thing. How the bean becomes powder. The split between those two words happens at one specific moment in the production process. It starts with a pod. Cacao pods grow directly on the trunk of the tree, each one holding 30 to 50 seeds surrounded by sweet white pulp. Farmers cut them by hand, open each pod, and scoop out the seed. Those seeds go into wooden boxes and get covered with banana leaves, where they sit for 5 to 7 days, fermenting. Bacteria and natural yeast break down the pulp and chemically transform the seeds inside. Without fermentation, chocolate flavor never fully develops, and there is no fixing it after the fact. After fermentation, the beans are dried in the sun for up to 2 weeks, then shipped to a factory. Inside the factory, the beans get roasted. That is where cacao becomes cocoa. The actual difference cacao powder is made by pressing beans processed at low temperatures. The fat cacao butter gets separated from the solid, which are then ground into a fine powder. Low heat throughout. Cocoa powder goes through the same basic process, except the beans are roasted first at temperatures between 300 and 375 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly 150 to 190 Celsius. That heat changes the molecular structure of the bean. It breaks down some of the natural compounds, softens the bitterness, and creates the familiar mellow chocolate flavor you know from brownies and hot cocoa. Less heat, more natural compounds survive. More heat, smoother flavor, fewer compounds. Same bean, different temperatures. Now the part that should bother you. The FDA has no official rules about which word a company has to use on a label. None. A brand can call their product cacao, whether the beans were cold pressed or roasted at 375 degrees. No enforcement, no legal definition separating the two words. A significant chunk of that price difference on the shelf is marketing, not a better product, a better label. The third option that actually matters for baking. There is a third version that most people walk right past, and it is the one that matters most if you bake. Dutch processed cocoa, also called alkalized cocoa. Natural cocoa powder is acidic, with a pH between 5 and 6. Dutch processed cocoa gets treated with an alkaline solution, which neutralizes that acidity and brings the pH to about 7. The result is a darker powder with a smoother, less bitter flavor. For some things, that is genuinely better. But it creates a baking problem most people only discover after ruining something. Baking soda needs an acid to activate. That reaction is what creates the bubbles that make baked goods rise. Natural cocoa provides that acid. Dutch processed cocoa, with its neutralized pH, does not. Use Dutch processed in a recipe that calls for baking soda, and the reaction does not happen the way it should. Flat brownie. Cake that stays dense. Dutch processed needs baking powder instead, which has its own acid built in. You buy the darkest, most serious looking tin because it looks premium. The recipe calls for baking soda. Nothing rises, you blame the recipe. The recipe was fine. The nutrition question. The health claims around cacao are real, but they need some air let out of them. Cacao retains more flavonoids, antioxidants, and polyphenols than cocoa because less processing means more of those compounds survive. The main one is epicatechin, which research has linked to cardiovascular health and cognitive function. Dutch processed loses the most. Natural cocoa loses some. Raw cacao retains the most. That part is accurate. And the marketing is not entirely wrong, but the amount of powder you actually put in a recipe is small. The per-serving difference in compounds is real. Smoothies, overnight oats, no bake stuff. Cooking with cacao largely closes the gap anyway, since heat degrades the flavonoids whether you started with cacao or cocoa. The most expensive option is not automatically the healthiest. It depends on what you are making. The Maya and the bean that was money. Before any of this was a supermarket argument, Cacao was something else. Around 250 AD, the Maya began cultivating cacao systematically. What they made with it looked nothing like anything in a modern chocolate aisle. It was a drink, cold and bitter, mixed with chili peppers and a quiote, a reddish spice. No sugar. The foam was considered the best part. Women poured the liquid from one vessel to another repeatedly, just to build the froth on top. The foam was not decoration. It was the point of the drink. For a long time, historians assumed cacao was reserved for Maya elite. A study published in Science News corrected that. Cacao residue has been found on ceramics from households across all social levels. Everyone drank it. And the beans functioned as money. 100 cacao beans could buy you a turkey. 3 beans could buy you an avocado. These are documented exchange rates from historical record. The beans were valuable enough that people counterfeited them. They would hollow out a cacao shell, fill it with clay or mud, and pass it off as real at the market. Counterfeit currency, in a civilization from 250 AD, made of mud and chocolate shells. The same bean sitting in your pantry right now, in the $4 generic bag, or the $16 ceremonial grade tin, was being faked with mud 1,000 years before the chocolate bar existed. 4 types of chocolate, including one nobody saw coming. Dark chocolate has to contain at least 35% cocoa solids under FDA standards. Most bars go much higher, anywhere from 50 to 90% or more. Milk chocolate requires at least 10% cocoa solids per the FDA. Most sits between 10 and 30%, with dried milk making up the rest. White chocolate contains 0 cocoa solid. It is made from cocoa butter, milk solids, and sugar. The FDA requires at least 20% cocoa butter for a product to call itself white chocolate. Without cocoa solids, it does not taste like chocolate in any traditional sense. Whether it counts as real chocolate is an argument that has been running for decades without resolution. Then in 2017, a Swiss company called Callebaut announced a 4th type, ruby chocolate. Callebaut spent 15 years on it. It has a natural pink color and a flavor described as fruity and slightly tart, close to berry, with no added coloring or berry flavoring. The color and taste come from a processing method applied to what the company calls ruby cocoa beans. It contains 47.3% cocoa solids, putting it in roughly the same range as milk chocolate. The previous time a new type of chocolate was introduced was white chocolate, more than 80 years earlier. Google searches for ruby chocolate have surpassed 120 million since the launch. Whether it becomes a genuine 4th category or a long-running novelty is still unclear. Did you buy the wrong ingredient? Probably not. But you may have been paying more for a label than for a difference.